What really happened to Anne Boleyn's head after her execution? A severed head, not displayed, not buried with the body, then it vanished. In Tudor royalty, death didn't always end the story. Some deaths were forced into silence. In 1793, when Charlotte Corday was executed for the assassination of Jean-Paul Marat, witnesses recorded a detail they never forgot. After her head fell, a man lifted it up. According to those present, the face was not still. The cheeks flushed. The expression changed, as if anger had not yet left the body. That may sound impossible, but Corday was not the only case. Across historical accounts, severed heads were said to show brief signs of response. Eyes that seemed to move, lips that twitched, faces that shifted when stimulated. Today, medicine explains this as residual nerve reflexes. But in pre-modern societies, it meant something else entirely. It raised a disturbing question. If consciousness does not shut off immediately, then death is no longer a clean moment. And that uncertainty made power uneasy, because power depends on clear endings. A body that is not fully silent after death is something no authority can truly control. In 1536, when Anne Boleyn was beheaded at the Tower of London, witnesses left behind accounts that were deeply unsettling. According to several contemporary sources and later retellings, after the strike of the French swordsman, her lips continued to move for a few seconds. Her eyes were said to open, then close again, as if the body had not yet understood that life had ended. In Tudor England, there was no modern concept of neurological reflexes. Movements after death were not interpreted through physiology, but through fear and religious belief. To those present, a head that did not immediately fall still was not a neutral sight. It was taken as a sign that something remained unresolved. There is no document confirming that Anne Boleyn tried to speak, nor is there evidence to support a supernatural explanation. What remains is only the record of reaction. The scene left those who witnessed it shaken and disturbed, because in a system of power built on ritual and order, death needed to be final. Any indication that life might linger, even for a few seconds, undermined the sense of control that royal authority depended on. After executions for treason in Tudor England, the ritual usually followed a fixed pattern. A severed head was not merely what remained of the body. It became a tool for extending power beyond death, displayed, mounted on a spike, and placed where the public was forced to see it. Anne Boleyn's case did not follow that pattern. There is no record that her head was ever put on display. No file describes its preservation or handling after the execution, and there is no evidence that it was buried with her body. After May 19, 1536, her head disappears from the familiar chain of Tudor ritual. In the historical context of the time, this absence cannot be dismissed as accidental. The public display of a traitor's head had been repeated for decades, a way for the state to assert that punishment did not end at the scaffold. So the anomaly is not that Anne Boleyn was executed, it lies here. Her death was not allowed to continue existing in public space. This was not merely an execution, it was an attempt to control what remained after death itself. Anne Boleyn was born into the household of Thomas Boleyn, a man who understood the value of education and international connections as tools for advancement. At a very young age, Anne was sent abroad, first to the Netherlands, then to France, to serve in foreign courts. This early displacement was not a rare privilege, but part of a deliberate strategy, training a daughter to function as a diplomatic asset. In France, Anne grew up in an environment where royal women were more than symbolic figures. She observed queens and noblewomen taking part in political life, shaping decisions, patronizing religious causes, and sustaining their own networks of influence. Power there was not openly displayed, but it was real, exercised through counsel, presence, and the ability to persuade. This was not the model familiar to Tudor England. When Anne returned home, she brought with her what she had learned: confidence in bearing, political fluency, and a different understanding of what a queen could be. But the Tudor court was not built to receive such qualities. Here, women were expected to remain silent, produce sons, and withdraw from the space of power. Anne's education thus became a contradiction from the very beginning, not because she exceeded the norms of her age, but because she had been prepared for a different court. and would never fully belong to the one she was forced to live within. The earliest recorded relationship in Anne Boleyn's life was with Henry Percy, heir to one of England's great noble families. They were young, closely attached, and according to several contemporary accounts had entered into a private commitment. But within the power structure of the Tudor court, personal emotion carried no legal weight. When the relationship was discovered, Thomas Wolsey intervened decisively. The attachment was terminated. Percy was compelled to marry another woman as arranged. Anne was removed from her own choice without any right of appeal. No public explanation was offered. The decision was simply enforced. The context allowed no alternative reading. Aristocratic marriage was a tool of alliance, not the outcome of affection. Women's bodies and the futures tied to them were controlled by those who governed property, honor, and political order. For Anne, this was more than a failed relationship. It was her first lesson in the true limits of freedom. She learned that personal choice could be revoked at any moment, and that power did not require violence to dispossess, only an order issued from the proper place. When Henry VIII turned his attention to Anne Boleyn, the court's familiar pattern appeared ready, a discreet, uncommitted extramarital relationship. But Anne refused that role. According to multiple accounts, she rejected the position of mistress and would accept only one status: lawful marriage. That refusal forced the king to confront a chain of consequences without precedent. Henry was still married to Catherine of Aragon, a union recognized by the Catholic Church. When his request for annulment was denied, the king chose another path, breaking from the authority of Rome and placing himself at the head of the Church of England. The marriage to Anne was therefore not merely a personal event. It became the flashpoint for a profound reordering of power. Monasteries were dissolved, church lands were seized, diplomatic ties with Catholic Europe fractured. The kingdom's entire religious order was upended. In this context, Anne did not stand at the margins. She occupied the center of the upheaval, not as the final decision-maker, but as the factor that made those decisions unavoidable. Her role was simultaneously magnified and blamed. Anne Boleyn did not simply become queen. She became the symbol of a crisis of authority in which the king's private life triggered transformations that extended far beyond the royal bedchamber, into the church, the state, and the structure of an entire nation. In 1533, Anne Boleyn gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth I. At court, it was a legitimate event. In terms of power, it was a failure. The context of the moment allowed no ambiguity. Henry VIII required a male heir to secure dynastic continuity and silence doubts about the kingdom's political future. Every decision that had come before, divorce, the break with Rome, the restructuring of the church, had been justified by that objective. When the child did not meet expectation, the king's patience began to thin. The shift was swift and visible. Attention faded. Intimacy disappeared. Private meetings and passionate letters came to an end. Anne remained queen in title, but the protective space around her narrowed by the day. Within the Tudor order, reproduction was not a private matter. It was a political function. When the queen's body failed to deliver the required outcome, the power attached to that body was reassessed. The fracture did not lie in the fact that Anne bore a daughter. It lay here. From that moment on, the power that had once shielded her no longer had a reason to remain.
Look at her.
In early 1536, Thomas Cromwell began constructing a legal campaign aimed directly at Anne Boleyn. The charges were annihilating in scope: adultery, treason, and incest, including allegations involving her brother, George Boleyn. On paper, these were offenses sufficient to warrant a death sentence. Yet embedded within the accusations were severe contradictions. Several of the alleged incidents were dated to periods when Anne was either visibly pregnant or recovering from childbirth, intervals in which biologically the acts described would have been nearly impossible. These impossibilities were not corrected. They were left in place. The context explains why. Key witnesses were examined under pressure, by many accounts tortured or promised reward. Testimonies were gathered quickly, arranged efficiently, and fed directly into the judicial process. The trial moved with deliberate speed, leaving no space for challenge or independent verification. Within the Tudor political order, truth was not the deciding factor. What mattered was the image produced: a queen who had forfeited moral legitimacy. Once public perception had been shaped, evidence became little more than procedural formality. This legal construction was not designed to establish guilt. It was designed to produce an outcome that could be accepted. And once that outcome existed, truth, whether present or absent, ceased to occupy the center. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn faced the executioner at the Tower of London. Unlike the typical Tudor method of beheading with an English axe, Henry VIII chose a French swordsman. The execution was swift, precise, and recorded as humane, a departure from the more brutal norms of the time. This unusual choice immediately raised questions. Why deviate from the standard ritual? Was it a gesture of mercy or something more calculated? Anne, dressed carefully in a gray damask gown, a mantle draped with care, every detail befitting a queen. Her final words were measured, diplomatic, almost unnervingly calm. The sword struck with surgical precision, severing her head cleanly. Yet even in this act, the unusual nature of her death left a mark on history. Where were her remains? How was her body treated afterward? The French sword spared her a drawn-out, axe-blow execution, but it did not answer the lingering questions about what happened next. In the Tudor world, death was not merely an end. It was a ritual, a statement, a tool of power. By altering the form of execution, Anne's death challenged expectations and left historians asking, what became of the queen once the sword had fallen? Anne Boleyn's body was placed in an old wooden chest, hastily interred in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the Tower grounds. There was no official record of her head, no display, no preservation, no ceremonial recognition. Over the centuries, speculation has emerged. Some historians suggest that Elizabeth I may have secretly arranged for her mother's remains to be reunited or reburied. Others propose the head was deliberately hidden, preserved as evidence, or removed to prevent scandal. Yet there is no contemporary documentation to confirm any of these theories. The significance of Anne's death goes beyond the scaffold. It was not designed primarily to intimidate or serve as a warning. The goal was far more deliberate, to erase. In Tudor England, power relied not only on law and violence, but on control over memory. By suppressing public recognition of Anne's death and removing her from official record, those in authority sought to eliminate her presence entirely, both physically and symbolically. Her story, her agency, and even her final moments were subjected to systematic silencing. Anne Boleyn's execution was a decisive act, but the true strategy extended beyond the blade. It was a campaign to expunge her existence from public consciousness, ensuring that the queen who once challenged convention would be remembered only as a shadow, or not at all. Anne Boleyn's daughter Elizabeth would grow to become England's most powerful monarch. She inherited a throne, a kingdom, and a legacy that her mother's execution had sought to erase. The attempt to obliterate Anne's memory, her life, her choices, her influence, ultimately failed. Efforts to control history, to suppress her existence, could not prevent the rise of her daughter. Elizabeth's reign redefined the monarchy, restored stability, and secured a golden age that none of Henry VIII's machinations could have foreseen. In Tudor terms, death had been intended as an instrument of control. Yet not every death disappears according to the designs of power. History has a way of asserting itself, bending the narratives imposed from above, and preserving what authority once tried to silence. Anne Boleyn's story did not vanish. Her execution was meant to close a chapter, but through Elizabeth, her influence endured. The final irony, the queen whom Henry sought to erase became the mother of a reign that would shape England for generations. Nearly 5 centuries have passed, yet the fate of Anne Boleyn's head remains a mystery. No record provides a definitive answer. No artifact confirms its whereabouts. The unresolved question is not simply where it ended up. The deeper mystery lies in why it had to disappear at all. Why did those in power feel the need to erase even the smallest trace of her existence? Was it fear, control, or an attempt to rewrite history itself? Anne's death was meant to be absolute, but the absence of her head only amplified the questions. Today, the silence surrounding her remains continues to provoke curiosity and speculation. Nearly 500 years later, the story of Anne Boleyn reminds us that power can try to obliterate memory, but it cannot fully erase it. And perhaps the real question is not what became of her head, but why someone felt it had to vanish.